My name is Sarah Dollamore, and I'll be the moderator today. I'm a farmer member on the NFU board since 2019. And as a quick disclosure, we'll be recording this session for those who couldn't make it in real time. So Brian, can you hit record? Okay, cool. I'm speaking to you guys today from the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Wendat, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation on Turtle Island and what is now known as Ontario, Canada. And I'm able to pursue my dream of farming in part because my ancestors took advantage of broken treaty promises, benefited from them, and then I in turn continue to benefit from them. And I acknowledge this and I open myself to listening and learning about this continually. And I can only speak about this from my personal context, which might be similar to many, is not universal to the great diversity of peoples here in Ontario. And I encourage whoever and wherever you are on your journey, am I back?
Yes.
You're back.
You're back. Sorry, we just lost you for a second.
Oh my gosh. Oh, my heart. Yeah, I encourage wherever you are, both personally and geographically, to engage with questions around what truly equal opportunities are, especially for the Indigenous peoples for whom we are guests on this land. So please join me in welcoming our panelists for this afternoon in order of appearance. Josephine Grey is a human rights advocate, community organizer, and public speaker. She's dedicated to cultivating human rights-based solutions to humanity's greatest challenges: extreme inequity, non-sustainability, and climate chaos. She's based in Toronto, specifically St. Jamestown. Susan Lloyd Swail is a registered professional planner, researcher, and smart growth consultant who loves to seek out the public interest and advocate for good planning. She's based in York, specifically King Township. And Debbe Crandall is a policy advisor and environmental advocate. She's contributed to landscape scale conservation planning initiatives at the provincial level and regional growth management issues since 1990. And she's based in Peel region in Caledon specifically. So for anyone whose head is spinning a bit after that, I've generated a visual resource of all the panelists' like myriad affiliations and projects they're involved in, because they're so awesome and so many, and the network that's emerging from that on a platform called Miro. And I'll be sharing the link in the chat for anyone who just wants to see a visualization of all the great stuff that they're involved in. Some quick housekeeping. Owen's our chat moderator today, and he'll introduce himself there for anyone who doesn't know him. So head on over to the chat and please submit your general questions or specific questions to our panelists through Owen, and he'll present them to the group during our audience Q&A, which will be in about an hour into the session. Okay, I don't know about all of you, but I'm looking forward to hearing about these fascinatingly complex and enlivening issues from our panelists. So without further ado, I will hand the floor over to Josephine Grey.
Hello, thanks for having me. Would it be okay? Could you help me to screen share or give me permission so I can show you a website and get to that point?
You should have permission now to share.
Thank you. All right, so in 2019, we held a urban-rural forum on the local food system, and we invited NFU members to join us, and we had a great discussion with a number of people involved in the food system, and we're quite excited to start making those connections and building those bridges. Then we were going to have another one in 2020, and of course COVID happened, so we transitioned to an online emergency food forum. We had quite a lot of folks join that forum, whether they were from food organizations or from farms, and some academics, and a lot of different kind of folks who are very interested in how we can get to a more resilient food system. We had a panel, we had a number of breakout groups, we had, I think, 3 different sessions, and what came out of that in the end were 2 things. One was an open letter, which I believe Local 305 has seen and signed. Thank you very much. The open letter is basically putting out the case that in addition to COVID, we have the climate emergency, and we're very concerned about transitioning our food system to become more just, more sustainable, more resilient. We heard a lot of concerns about the issues around farm work, people being available for farm work or adequately trained, particularly for agroecological farmers. And we noted that a lot of the funding that was coming out from various levels of government were still pointed towards the sort of status quo, more corporate parts of the food system, and really left out small farmers and vulnerable communities in a number of ways. You know, for us who are living in vulnerable communities in downtown Toronto, basically it seems like our only option to engage is largely through food banks or other forms of charitable food distribution, which is, you know, temporarily perhaps a bit of a stopgap, but for many people in a community like mine, very insufficient. So we also have started having discussions about what we could see are gaps in this local food system. And although the emergency food forum was Ontario-wide, we realized that in the GTA, there's a lot of complexity and a lot of different parts, moving parts of the food system. And we're looking at those gaps. We decided to quote unquote, drive policy by creating action on the ground. So we started developing the Eco-Just Food Network as a means to connect farmers, vulnerable communities, people who want to support agroecological farmers, people who want to be a part of processing and distributing really healthy food, because this has been a really huge problem for particularly BIPOC communities and families and essential workers living in very crowded, dense conditions and the like. So Eco-Just Food Network has been slowly but surely developing, and we did manage to have a couple of farm trips, and we did manage to get some of that food and bring it back to Land Back Camp on Dawes Road, which is still going, by the way. We're now calling it a village. And part of Eco-Just Food Network's focus is to engage and incorporate and prioritize Black and Indigenous food sovereignty, and to be able to mount trainings to bring people onto farms to help support farmers in planting and harvesting and gleaning like non-marketable vegetables and the like. We want to engage in the training that would include Indigenous land care, Indigenous foodways, as well as the wisdom and knowledge that arises from many Black communities, and ensure that we have the benefit of sharing knowledge, land, and labor between all the moving parts of a more resilient food system. So I'm going to try to share a screen. I think I can do this. Here we go. This is our website, and I want to mention that Lily, who is your member of Fish Tree Farms, has done an enormous amount of work on this website, and it's really quite extraordinary. We posted the open letter on it, as you can see. You can see here how we have characterized what it is we're trying to do. We want to be able to mobilize people and resources. We believe that food insecurity is going to continue. We have, and therefore we need to answer and respond to it quickly. We are in the process of applying for some grants and the like, but we also have a GoFundMe here, as you can see. There is a number of parts to this website that can support the work that we're trying to do. Over here, you can see that Lily has created a work center so that people are able to go in and sign up as volunteers to tell us what they need to do. We can track expenses. We have here a Lumio platform to allow for a core team and a steering committee to communicate, make decisions, set meetings, things like that. So she's done an amazing job on this. There's a section around how you can get involved, the kinds of things that we're looking for, the kinds of help that we need. We definitely are currently looking for support around social media. We recognize too that, you know, the food terminal in GTA is sitting in a floodplain. So we think it's incredibly important to start figuring out ways to diversify how we gather and distribute and store food as well. Here are some of the roles and responsibilities. And we really encourage, we've had a great time so far already with some of our farm members, connecting and engaging with our emergency food relief project in St. Jamestown, which is sort of one of your urban pilot members as a vulnerable community. We've been long working on a food hub model, and we currently have an emergency food relief project. And we've been lucky to be able to purchase healthy organic produce from Wolf Farms, Fish Tree Farms, and it's been really very, very gratefully received by our members and the folks who are getting food hampers. We want to also be able to have dialogues from time to time, just to allow people to freely share and discuss ideas and brainstorm, things like that. And I should let you know too that we do plan to have we've had a lot of people gradually signing on to the open letter from the Emergency Food Forum, and we do plan to have a public release of this letter in February. We want to do this as a challenge to government to start reorienting their policies, to start looking at food systems as a whole, to start reallocating their funding to support these kinds of initiatives so that people are able to connect more directly between farmers and communities, and also to recognize and address the fact that building a resilient local food system is also a form of climate adaptation and climate mitigation. And we know that there's going to be a lot more energy and funding and resources needing to be applied to climate adaptation. So I think it's really important to connect those two very important priorities and show how they interconnect. So we're going to be talking about that in February. We're going to go out in front of a empty, abandoned food market on Queen Street that has been unused because it's in a legal struggle. And we're going to point to that as an example of the kinds of infrastructure that we need in order to build up a new and better food system. I guess another thing is, there was something else. Oh yes, so we are also looking at how we can amplify the public to understand the importance of healthy, nutritious food and how farmers are crucial to that, and educate urban people around the hardships and the struggles that are facing our local farmers. So we're very, very pleased and grateful that, NFU members are a part of this, and we encourage more to join, and we would love to work with you on figuring out how to make a really manageable and supportive system to be getting you the help you need, both on a direct engagement level of people coming out to assist you in the work you need to do, but also to, to support you from an urban perspective on the policy changes that are needed to ensure that smaller farmers and agroecological farmers are able to access resources and supports and not live constantly in debt and not have to plow under crops. We know that some people were plowing under crops because they just didn't have the sufficient labor to harvest. We want to change that. We also want to make sure that new farms are able to spring up and support that process. And we envision this food corps idea of having farm and food workers who now do food differently and more sustainably, potentially becoming a worker co-op as we develop. We want to get funding to have some resources such as a mobile farm work kit of, hand washing stations, toilets, a kitchen, because many smaller farms do not have these kinds of facilities. So we're going to be arguing for mobile units to support that. And then in the city, we'll be fighting to get more space to do food storage and processing within communities. And that's something that St. Jamestown is very committed to doing and is working hard on. So we are sort of your first urban partner at that end of the supply chain, and hope to engage with you in creating a much more reasonable and sustainable supply chain. So these are the kinds of things that we're doing. And, people who are willing to offer up their farms as training sites would be very welcome, as well as those who would be able to assist us in developing our systems. We're going to be using digital platforms in order to connect people directly. We're not trying to become a different new organization. We're trying to be a network where everybody can plug in and benefit from engaging with each other. So that's pretty much what we're doing. And if Lily wants to add in anything I missed, please do. And any questions would be welcome when they come up on the agenda. I just recall that I think I was supposed to talk a little bit about why I'm involved in this work. Is that right, Sarah?
Yeah, if you could just touch on that quickly about, where you're coming from on a personal level, so folks can kind of get a sense of who you are as a person.
Right, sorry about that. I'm so excited about the network that I forgot.
It's exciting.
Yeah, so I've been involved in this kind of work since I worked on a farm as a teenager, and my first activism work was around trying to protect farmland. But then as I became a mother, I started fighting around poverty issues and the issues that face those of us who are low income and people of color trying to raise families. I am a person of mixed race, and my children are as well. And living in a very densely crowded downtown community, I saw a lot of issues facing newcomers, facing people of color, and we started Lift Low-Income Families together to have a voice in trying to address policy change and organize people on the ground. And we've been doing that for over 30 years. And part of our work locally turned to creating the St. Jamestown Community Enterprise Co-op. So we believe very strongly in cooperative models and as a democratic, autonomous way of organizing ourselves, of making sure that all people are member owners and not just volunteers, which can be really hard on poor people, particularly because a lot of newcomers from the Global South are much more familiar with cooperatives. And we also use a human rights framework as an operating applied principle in our work, which is very helpful when we're working with people from a vast diversity of backgrounds. Our community speaks 140 languages, and it's probably the most diverse community in the world. So we've learned a lot of things, a lot of strategies for being able to be inclusive of people from all walks of life and all genders and the like. And I was also part of food share Toronto. Early on realized that our food system was very precarious, and that, and I've been watched the corporate takeover of the food system, and I'm aware from my engagement with local farm and food co-op of many wonderful efforts taking place to try to change how farming is done, how farmland is protected. So I've been very involved in a variety of ways, both internationally, regionally, and locally over many, many years. As a parent, as a grandparent, I would characterize myself as a human rights defender and educator, a human rights organizer. And it's very gratifying work, but it's also generally unpaid, and I haven't been paid for a very long time, but I get an enormous amount of satisfaction from being able to live my purpose. And I've been a proud member of the NFU on and off for decades, and became very aware of the struggles facing farmers when I was doing focus groups across Ontario and talking to people from farms, and the lack of supports, the lack of social programs, the lack of income programs that farmers have to struggle with. So it's always been very important to me and close to my heart. And it's another reason why I'm very, very involved in the basic income movement, and actually collaborated with Eric McVeigh from NFU Ontario around pushing for basic income. I do the same for artists. I think arts and food and culture are all very closely related. And I think we all need to celebrate, and we should have great big harvest parties and great big planting parties so that we can be humans as well as workers. So that's a bit about me, and I will remain dedicated to this process and what we're doing as long as I can live and breathe. So thank you very much for having me today.
Thank you so much, Josephine. That was great. I think a lot of our members can commiserate with the wanting to be a human and not just a worker, just to celebrate high quality of life. That's very meaningful. Thank you. Okay, yeah. Susan, you're up.
Hello, how are you guys doing today? I'm just going to share my screen now. See if I can do that. Yeah, Here we are. And I'll just get my slideshow up and going. There we go. Okay, so I am a parent and a grandparent, and I've lived in the township of King for 25 years now. I was a former counselor in the township of King way back in 2000 when we were fighting the big pipe. And after that, I was so flummoxed by my lack of ability as a counselor to have any influence on land use planning, and that I became a planner, went back to university. From 2014 to 2019, I worked in Environmental Defense Canada, and I ran their Livable Communities program. And I was also involved in the policy review of the Greenbelt and Growth Plan in 2015 with the Liberal government for the Ontario Greenbelt Alliance, which is an alliance of 120 organizations right across the Great Golden Horseshoe. And so today I'm going to give you a quick overview of the GTA West Highway, where it is, what the impacts are, and what you can do. So I'm going to start with a map. This is not in scale, but is a map of the proposed highway. And this highway is going to be a multimodal corridor that stretches from in Halton Hills there. It meets the 407, you can see. And then it goes up through Brampton. This is all farmland, this yellow stuff. It goes up across southern Caledon, northern Brampton. And then it goes down, crosses the Humber River area, and over the top of Vaughan there. And so this is going to cross numerous watersheds. It's going to impact the agricultural land, some of the best agricultural land we have left in the northern Brampton there. That's all till plain. I'm sure Deb will talk about that. And I really don't think this highway is needed. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Oh, sorry. I don't know why I did that. Okay, so here's a little timeline of the project to date. It started with an MTO strategy looking at the future route from Guelph to Bolton. Then it was brought up again in the growth plan, which looks at growth right across the Greater Golden Horseshoe. The project was then conceptualized in the Big Move Regional Transportation Plan, which Metrolinx runs. And the environmental assessment started around 2008. The environmental assessment started, and then when the Liberals were in power under Wynne, we put a lot of pressure on that government through environmental defense and our campaign to stop the GTA West Highway. We also called 413 Highway. We named it that because we hope it's an unlucky highway. We put enough pressure on the government that they called a panel to review the need for this highway. That panel came up with a number of recommendations, and one of them was to halt this highway, the EA. So very happy about that. But then we got the Ford government in, and the highway was put back on the books again. So it's now at the design review process, which is expected to be completed by 2022. So what are the impacts of the GTA West Highway? So on the environment, it's going to have quite a direct impact on the wildlife in the area. There's going to be a loss of about 1,000 acres of land, which is really important for wildlife movement across the area. 85 watercourse crossings, 220 wetlands are affected. There are significant water quality impacts from salt and runoff in the area. We can also expect, of course, increased greenhouse gases, loss of cooling and absorption effect from the natural areas that will be paved over. And those living within 500 meters of the highway will be impacted by traffic-related air pollution, which affects heart and lung, causes heart and lung conditions, and is also associated with depression. So the loss of agricultural land has many indirect impacts from the highway. At the top of the list are sprawl, of course, and the loss of agricultural land, as I said. All too often, we look at agricultural land as development land in waiting, but it's not. It's a finite resource, as many of you know, and less than 4% of Canada is fertile enough to grow food on, and it's generally located within our city areas. So it's always been a struggle to mitigate between development and protecting farmland. And that's really what the growth plan was designed to do, but some people might say it's failing. So what do we need? We need stronger policies to protect prime farmland and agricultural systems for the long term. When I managed the Liverpool Community Program Environmental Defense, we partnered with the Ontario Federation of Agriculture to create a report called Farmland at Risk. I think it's probably still available online. And it's quite an excellent report. I think maybe doesn't go far enough, but it does talk about the importance of a positive framework for land use planning and agriculture, so we can protect agriculture for the long term and going forward. So what are some of the issues with the GTA West Highway corridor? Well, it's contrary to smart, affordable growth. And if you heard this government talking about affordable housing a lot, you're not going to be building affordable housing on farmland in the middle of Caledon. The infrastructure policies in the growth plan that ensure existing infrastructure is optimized before new infrastructure is built, there's a conflict there. And this principle of integrating the growth plan and infrastructure is really, really important going forward. If we don't do that, there's going to be huge cost implications for that. And at this time, right now, you've got the region of Peel, York, and Durham. All the regional municipalities are going through their regional official plans. They're planning right now to 2051, which is a new plan horizon. And at the same time, and I hope Deb will talk about this now more, Caledon, Brampton, and Mississauga, all within the region of Peel, are fighting over growth allocations. So they all want that growth, but that growth really needs to be located within the existing urban areas. If we don't do that, we are just paving over valuable farmland and not maximizing the infrastructure which already exists within our cities. So we need smarter growth, dense urban centers that support affordable housing, that provide more housing options and lower our taxes. They also support walkable, transit-oriented communities, reduce greenhouse gases, and firm urban boundaries. So growing up and not out is a much better option. So we kind of see the GTA West Highway is a solution creating a problem here. And research has shown that highways do not reduce congestion. They actually create more congestion through a principle called induced demand. The more roads you have, the more cars and more people get in them and drive places. So it's really not a good solution. And finally, the highway is, back in 2012, the environmental assessment did a cost estimate of $4 to $6 billion for construction. That excludes, sorry, it says including, it should be excluding expropriation costs. So we estimate now it's going to be about $10 billion or more for this highway. So it's a considerable cost, and that money is certainly needed in other jurisdictions within our provincial budget. So here is a close-up of the highway. You can see the number of river crossings there. The brown areas are conservation areas that are already public lands. And it's just amazing what we are going to be paving over with this highway. So what are the alternatives? So growing smarter, as I've said, within our existing urban areas and not sprawling out into our green fields. And the revised growth plan actually prioritizes transit within our existing urban areas. So that's a really positive, but then you've got a regional transportation plan that's put up by Metrolinx that is not keeping up with the planning at the local level. So there are conflicting and overlapping plans, and they just haven't got it together to visualize what growth should happen. We're hoping that in the next few years, as we finalize our plans, that we can start making a more sustainable plan for the area. We also need to make better use of our existing roads, right? There are a number of roads that could be widened, and investing in transit is a great opportunity. as well as incentivizing trucks to use the 407 instead of building a new highway just for trucks. We've also got low carbon technologies that are coming on board, and the opportunities that they present definitely can make a difference. So there was a report done recently by Environmental Defense Canada and Transport Action. It was released just last year. It really looks at the alternatives in more detail, and it's really worth looking at if you want to get deeply involved in this issue. And it's available on the Environmental Defense website. And here are some resources. So EDC right now has a website, Stop the 413. They have a petition up. They have a Facebook page. They have lawn signs that are available for people in the area. They have a sign-on letter for groups to sign on to if you're interested. On social media, you can find all kinds of great social media at hashtag Stop the 413. And of course, they always suggest if you really want to make a difference, a personal letter is the best to influence your political leaders. So public involvement is needed. Your official plan is within your area, whether you're in the city of Toronto or the region of Peel, Durham, York, all those official plans are going to be reviewed in the next year or two. You need to get involved and make sure that your municipality is pushing for smarter growth and not making sprawl the priority. So thank you, Sarah. I hope I was quick enough for you.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you, Susan. I think you covered a lot of ground in a short amount of time, so appreciate that.
Good. Hope it wasn't confusing.
I think it's challenging as with anything if you're not like already steeped in this world of planning. It's so complex that if you're not really familiar with it, you can feel out of your depth quite quickly. So one of my goals is to make understanding what's going on here and what's at play not only engaging but accessible to more people, because it's really actually going to affect them in their daily lives, and they have an opportunity to make a difference early on, right? So thank you for contributing to that. And okay, Deb, you're up next, and you're our last presentation. Then we're going to go to the pre-written discussion questions.
Okay, thanks very much. I'm going to try to do it without my headphones because it squishes my hair down. Let me pull up my screen. Okie dokie. So I'm going to, if it's okay with everybody, I'm going to keep it in this format so that I can see what's coming on. So as Sarah said, my name's Debbe Crandall. I am Sarah's aunt, and our family has lived here on this piece of land since the mid-1960s. And I cut my teeth on pre-Oak Ridges Moraine passion by running up and down our little creek that, as I realized later, is in fact very typical of this Oak Ridges Moraine landscape. And I got involved in this issue because our mayor, ex-mayor, ex-regional chair's family wanted to develop a bunch of land up on the top of the moraine. And that got me involved in all of this. And I never really stopped. So been involved in a number of different things. The presentation is geared to is to kind of understand the planning context so that one can see where we've come from and where we will hopefully be going. And the maps that I'm going to be using, most of them are from the Neptus GeoWeb website, and it's a wonderful resource. I haven't put a link in here, but I can do that later in the chat, which allows people to add layers, take layers off, show some time scales, and it just shows the whole region and the different layers within that region. So I want to start with this one, and this really, to me, encapsulates the challenge in front of us. What we have is we have a region now called the Greater Golden Horseshoe. You can see the highways, you can see the green of the Greenbelt, of which the Niagara Escarpment, Oak Ridges Moraine is part of it. The yellow is the prime agricultural land. We've got those highways that are just dissecting everything. We've got that dark gray of the urban areas. You can see the Caledon Street corridor. You can see how it's just grown and grown and grown. We've got the teal. Now the teal, it is not, so I didn't, the GeoWeb did not have that, the preferred route. So I just put that in there. And this is kind of the tableau. This is what we're dealing with. And, you know, big decisions have to be made in this region. How did we kind of get to this point? Back in 1971, Peel County was comprised of a whole lot of these disparate little areas, and Caledon is the top part of Peel County. Then we moved down to 1973, and people might not know this, but it was in 1973 that the Niagara Escarpment Act, not the plan, but the act came into effect. And that was the first look at a landscape from a landscape perspective, looking at the natural features, the face of the escarpment of interest. It was in 1985, I think, that the Niagara Escarpment Plan, Planning and Development, the Niagara Escarpment Plan was actually ratified. It took many years. That Niagara Escarpment was reduced from about 68% of its original dimensions, and years of consultation and wrangling and some pretty ugly politics reduced it down to about 68% of what it was there before. And then if you go a little bit further on, what we have here is in 1974 is when regional government came in, when the Region of Peel Act. York Region, I just found out, was actually created in 1971. I didn't know that before I did work on this slideshow. So 1974, you can see Halton Region, Peel, and Durham were created through the amalgamation of a whole lot of these disparate parts. In the case of Caledon, it was 5 different areas. It was Bolton, Caledon East, Albion Township, Caledon Township, and the northern part of Chinguacousy Township created. They came together and created the region of, the town of Caledon. So then we go to 1988 was when I started to get involved up on the Moraine. This is when we started to see all of these white signs. There had been a major recession prior to that, a huge pent up desire and need to kind of stimulate the economy. And suddenly Toronto started looking north, east, and west for growth and development. And the provincial government created the Office of the Greater Toronto Area, and that was the unit that went out to. Very interestingly, when we were starting on the Oak Ridges Moraine initiative, there's the whole eastern end of the Moraine, in fact, was not on our map because it was outside of the Greater Toronto Area, and we fought to have, in fact, that eastern part represented by the work that we were doing. Unfortunately, the GeoWeb map continues to bring that layer forward. So this is not as representative as I would like it to be. I remember the GeoWeb map being a lot more manipulable, just to show the extent of the growth, but it gives an idea on a regional level about what we're dealing with here. So that was 1988. And then interestingly enough, especially when we're talking about highways, the Greater Toronto Services Board was also created. And at this point, this was a Liberal government under David Peterson. And they realized that this whole big region that was the Greater Toronto Area, people were starting to move out there. It was starting to expand outward. And they attempted to bring some kind of regional perspective to transportation. It died. It was made extinct. It was closed down in 2001. And then that gave birth to the Metrolinx system, which we have now. So that was the Greater Toronto Services Board. Then we go to 1990, and this is really interesting that we're right in the middle of this. I'm going to call it an attack on Caledon planning, and I'm working on a piece to really put Caledon's planning in context, and I'm going to spend just a bit of time talking about this because I think it's really important. It was in 1990, before there was any idea of smart growth, before there was any idea of growth management, Caledon took a very strong position about tri-nodal growth, which was there were going to be 3 growth centers, one in Bolton, one in Caledon East, and one in this new area called Mayfield West. The idea being that the population, that these settlement areas would not just be focused on one area, because, and Bolton would have been the logical one because it was the largest, because if you take a look how big Caledon is, that there was no representation for the people of Caledon. And so the idea was that there would be a way of distributing these rural service settlement areas. And of interest today is that the numbers that were projected in the 1990 official plan, which was ratified by the Ontario Municipal Board because the Region of Peel had not gotten its official plan together. The province said, we're halting any work on any of the planning until the region gets its official plan. It came before the Ontario Municipal Board in 1997, and it was ratified by the province that this was a sound way forward. Of interest is the numbers that were projected then in the rural areas have not changed at all. In fact, all of the growth has taken place in Bolton, in Caledon East, and in the new Mayfield West. At the time, they were not connected to regional services. They were serviced by water and local wastewater. As they started to grow, the region extended the services up to there, which belies all of this stuff going out in the pointer and Isaac Callan's assertions about Caledon being addicted to urban sprawl. It's just not true. Boy, that I can feel myself getting all hepped up just because it's so, I get so angry. Anyway, in 2002, the Oak Ridges Moraine Conservation Plan came into effect, and you can see that there. So we've got the Niagara Escarpment in light green, the Oak Ridges Moraine Plan in dark green. And here again is just a closer view. You can see the yellow again is the prime agricultural land. Prime agricultural area. Of interest is there's not as much prime ag land in the Niagara Escarpment and Oak Ridges Moraine because of the hills, because of the valleys, because of the river systems. And that is something, when we're talking about agriculture, that in fact really disadvantages our form and scale of farming, because there are new guidelines and new permissions to prime agricultural farmers that we don't have access to on this on-farm diversified uses. That's a whole other topic, but it's just of interest that the prime ag land really is that really flat land, the Peel Plains, the flatlands that that these big tractors can actually maneuver now. I'm at 9 minutes. In 2005, the Greenbelt Act and Plan came in. So now we can see the dark green is the Oak Ridges Moraine, the lighter green is the Niagara Escarpment, and then the lightest of the green is the protected countryside areas of the underneath the Greenbelt Plan. What I've done here is, this is a slide that I put together because a lot of people, it was not explained well how this Greenbelt Plan actually works. So you can see here that the Greenbelt Plan is really comprised, the guts of it are the Niagara Escarpment, the Oak Ridges Moraine, and then all of that additional green protected countryside areas to create almost 2 million acres, Susan? It's acres, right? Yeah, 2 million acres of land that is permanently protected under the Greenbelt. Now we go to 2005 at the same time, which is the Greater Golden Horseshoe as a region was identified. It was a new planning area, a new regional plan area that was from the Places to Grow legislation and the plan. We started with the Greater Golden Horseshoe. No, sorry, we started with the Greater Toronto Area, then the Greater Toronto Area in Hamilton, now the Greater Golden Horseshoe. And this really shows how dynamic the region is and how it's always changing, but it's always growing outward. It's not getting smaller, it's not staying, it's growing outward. So whereas before it was just the 4 regions in Toronto and then Hamilton, now we're in the far-flung areas of really rural areas where there's no transit. There's the population is a commuter-based population. It's not so much rural anymore. So it's really a model of expansion, and it denotes the mind frame of the major decision makers, the ones that are behind the scenes pulling all these ropes. So 2011, South Caledon is open for business. Of interest here, so I haven't yet put the study area in. We have the Tri-Nodal growth management approach, and there was an understanding at that time about where growth was going to happen. There were a lot of farming families in the Peel Plains. There was the anticipation that there might be some development, but it was, the developers hadn't turned their eyes to the south part of Caledon. When the Greenbelt plan came in, when places to grow came in, what that did is it created something called the White Belt. And the White Belt is everything that is between the urban areas that are designated and the Greenbelt. That fundamentally shifted the planning in our case, Caledon. If you look at Caledon, it has some of the most of the White Belt in the Greater Golden, well, a lot of the White Belt in the Greater Golden Horseshoe. And what that did is it shifted it to, suddenly this land was now slated for development. So we still have that Tri-Nodal, but the pressures on the farmers, the pressures on our councillors, the pressures on the system, it has focused attention to a very, to the greedy side of our nature. And the big developers have streamed into Caledon and are to take advantage of that. It's an untenable situation with massive forces against all of us trying to work on a more sustainable, smart growth way. It's a really difficult situation we all find ourselves in. Again, there's just a close-up of Caledon. I'm at 13 minutes, so I've got 3 more slides. There's the 413 study area. Again, study area, it's not the highway, so it'll be a thin little red line similar to that, but that just shows you what's being affected. And one could say that the land, I don't know what the buffer is, the growth buffer that is associated with the highway, but who knows, it might actually be as big as that study area once that land shifts away from anything other than the potential for urban growth. Again, just a close-up of that. And I just wanted to close on, I guess, to me, this just says what's ahead of us and the challenges that we have to deal with. And on some days it's frightening, on other days it's exciting because of the challenges there, but it's a big challenge ahead of all of us. So that's all I have to say. 14 minutes.
Oof. All right.
Sorry, I was longer than I should have been. I'm sorry.
No, it's all good. I mean, like, I think it was a big ask for all of you guys to like distill these complex issues down into a small little presentation time. So well done on that. Everybody's really lit up in the chat about this. And yeah, there's a lot of great ideas coming, but I think, as I suspected, this is just going to be the beginning, I think, of some more integrated conversations across our various areas of interest, because they do intersect in such meaningful ways. And Josephine in particular is talking about how are we going to engage with the Indigenous communities whose traditional lands these are, to basically, get in on the fight. And maybe that's a reciprocal effort where we're turning more of a focus on helping them with their issues as well, around the land back lane stuff. Anyway, I'm swimming here. So let's move on quickly to the discussion questions that we prepared and sent to our panelists ahead of today. So these are just going to be a few questions to stimulate discussion among the 3 of these really awesome women, and then there's going to be room for Q&A here. So I've got a few questions here, but just quickly, where was I here? So to take an initial glance at these topics of the Eco-Just Food Network that you're involved in, Josephine, and the 413 highway, it might seem initially that they're not related, but how do you guys see your areas of concern intersecting with that of the other panelists, just like quickly upon hearing the presentations today? Who wants to go first? Susan? Okay. Go for it.
Yeah, okay, so I think it's really an intersection of values, and whether our society wants to put its money and its political power behind people or behind profit-making machines and developers. Are we looking after the land and the people, or are we looking after the pockets of some very wealthy individuals that are going to get wealthier? I mean, I think that's really the crux of the issue. And I really support what Josephine is doing. I just think it's amazing what you're doing in the community. And it just shows you how the sprawl model does not work. And we really need to develop communities where we work together and there is collaboration and connection and cooperation. So I want to applaud Josephine for what she is doing. It's fabulous.
Thank you so much, and I applaud you too. This is so incredibly crucial, and defending our land is, really existential issue for us. One of the things I think we need to take note of is that a lot of people are coming here from different parts of the world precisely because of climate change, and a lot of them recognize that our farmland is vitally important. So having the kind of resources that you've been part of creating to allow folks like that to get involved in the struggle is really, really critical. I see a lot of overlap because we can't have a locally just and sustainable food system if they pave it over with a highway or this or that or more, monster homes or whatever. I think there's an additional push that we need to make for being able to house more people on farms so that there's more human labor able to live sustainably on farms. And that gives us a lot more resilience and ability to adapt and adjust when we're dealing with the conditions of climate chaos and agriculture. So I see a lot of overlap. And I think too that perhaps Eco-Just Food Network, part of our interest is in the political advocacy side of things. And this would be an urgent issue for us to take up and engage our urban members into. Anybody who's involved in the food organization in Toronto should take this very seriously as a key issue to fight on, because again, I watched the funding criteria of things, and they do things like say, oh, well, you can have equipment and resources to distribute food, but we won't pay for opera, won't pay for people, and we won't pay for food. It's like, okay, so where are we getting the food? What kind of food? The disconnect between people and their food is so profound. So I think all working together, we can link these issues and show them how we're in a direct threat situation, and that, absolutely everybody in this entire region who eats has a stake in this fight. So I'd love to, work collaboratively with you all to make sure that this doesn't happen.
Well said, Josephine. I think that that's really the key here, is that we're all eaters and are, we're relying on some long supply chains predicated on cheap fuel so that we can eat. And it just seems really foolish to put all our eggs in that basket when it clearly has a hole in it. Deb, do you have a point to that?
Yeah, I guess I'm going to just kind of really try to step out a little bit and understand the pressures that are on the south part of Caledon. And since the 2002, when the Central Ontario Smart Growth Panel actually identified this as an economic corridor, the shifts started to happen. And with the cancellation, with the coming back on again, it has left municipalities and landowners in a complete tizzy. There's no certainty anywhere. Is there going to be urban development? Is there going to be a highway? And unfortunately, a lot of the farming families have exited. They've already exited South Caledon. It is owned by developers. And I think Susan Walmer from the Land Trust is putting together a list of who those people are. So at this point, if 413 were to exit, I think things could go back to, I think our first challenge is to get rid of the 413 and then allow the planning to settle itself after that. But until this is settled, it doesn't help any of us to extend this out. We have got to actually stop it within the next 2 years to make this a provincial and municipal election campaign. We have to stop it, because then we can go, okay, whew, take a breath. And how then do we move forward? But, you know, the land is owned by these developers. That land, it's so expensive. How can we put affordable housing? How can we put small farms on land that is just so expensive? We're just up against something really big. And so that's the reality ahead of us. But don't forget, Oak Ridges Moraine Greenbelt has a whole lot of small little farms. So, you know, we also have the potential of the Greenbelt lands and the farmers up here. So
I think that perhaps recognizing that like growth has to happen somewhere. It's just like, why are we using this land in such a voracious way? You know, like I'm not trying to devalue the creation of jobs and economic growth, but we have to recognize the finite aspect of that and not use so much of it on such a short-term gain project. It's so expensive, and like just wise spending. And
another thing is that in this whole fight, Mississauga and Brampton want Caledon's numbers. Caledon wants the numbers that have been forecasted to it. There is a disconnect between that macroeconomics of a regional. So if Caledon, I say give Mississauga and Brampton the numbers, give it, no more houses built here. There has to be a whole shift in the way then that the revenues are distributed to the municipalities, because right now, how development is the cash cow. That's how municipalities right now. So we have to start looking at an alternative economic model for how municipalities are going to survive. Well outside my pay grade, but
valuing land use for other things and rewarding like incentivizing municipalities for engaging in land use that's also ecologically responsible stuff.
And economically viable. Yeah.
Yeah, right. No small task. I knew this was going to get spicy. So my next question for you guys is, individuals and organizations are faced with the complexity of these issues that we've just heard about and can feel a bit adrift in the sea of actions that could be taken. Oh, where do I put my energies? You know, will it be effective? Because there's no indication that these actions will result in any significant outcomes. But given that these systems are large, complex networks of interaction that we can only partially conceive of at any one time, and within those systems that there are high impact pressure points or leverage points to affect change. And I'm posing this question to you guys because of your extensive history within systems like this. So I want you to call on your memory, but also contextualize it and how it might be different now. But what and where within these systems would you say are the high impact leverage points that could impact the trajectory in a meaningful way? Like, are they relationship leverage points, direct action, political, funding, etc.? I think we've touched on some of them now. So it's a big question. Do a little, maybe a hot take thing from each one, and then we can move on, because I think a lot of people in the chat have great questions and I want to give them ample time. Josephine?
I think one is, you know, the government's at least lip service to Indigenous rights. If you look at the content of the UNDRIP treaty, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, it says extremely clearly multiple times that Indigenous people must have some say and control and sovereignty over lands, whether they were appropriated or they still occupy them. So that's one tool that I think could be brought into some form of legal challenge. I think, and I do think a legal challenge on this would be really worthwhile and interesting. And I would love to help formulate such a thing. We've won a few. Another one is the rights of the child. I know that in the Philippines, they stopped, you know, the logging of a mountain based on the International Covenant on the Rights of the Child. And in an era where we're looking at global climate adaptation movement, where we're looking at the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, things like that, I think if we start to frame these fights in that broader vision, it will embarrass the Canadian government. I've embarrassed the government a few times at the UN, and we now have an even better and broader arena to do so. So that, you know, using the rights of the child as it is a human rights law that has primacy within Canadian legal, Canadian law. So when you invoke the right to the child, it is able to override all other legal considerations. And that would include the corporation's, right to make a profit, which is one of the things that we're laboring under free trade agreements, is that they've managed to manipulate our democratic sovereignty so that they can insert their right to exploit our land and people and everything else. So to fight back against that, the rights of the child actually can overrule that. So, and it's also publicly an argument that nobody can deny. And you can link that right back to the Dish with One Spoon Treaty, which, the peoples in this region agreed to protect and preserve the natural resources for future generations. So if we were to combine those things together, I think that both on the sort of public campaign side, but also in a legal challenge strategy, those sorts of things, because if you do a very public legal challenge, then you win whether you lose or you win, right? Because you show people the moral, ethical, and legal principles that you're working with. And this, I think, would allow for a unique form of solidarity too between the First Peoples and the settlers and the stolen peoples and everybody else who's here. So that's just some thoughts I was having about it. Yeah.
Deb?
So I think that's amazing. And the context here, just looking at the current political situation, which is right now, farmers are getting branded with, the farmers down in the Peel Plain, they're getting branded with being turncoats. So in my mind, we can't pit ourselves against our farmers. I think we have to understand the landscape. I'm going to speak only from Caledon. We have a rural-based, a lot of farmers are on our council. They have a certain perspective they bring to this, and I think we have to engage with them. I think we have to make the connection between climate change, human health, and the 413, and the broader idea of we have to feed ourselves. So, and I think we do that. We have an election in 2022, which is both provincial and municipal, and it forms the basis of that election. We start now, we start organizing now to make sure that that is an election issue. So I really think that understanding the landscape, understanding that a lot of these farmers, they've already checked out. So get rid of the 413 and then we can regain our planning.
And it's totally unfair. I just like to say that farmers are put all the pressures on them, like they get all the flack. Oh, you sold your land, you sold out. Like, what about the systems that are at play that made their land so expensive that they couldn't afford to run a profitable farm business that was heavily subsidized anyway? Like, it's just, I think that it's tough as well for the NFU, because we are a farm-based organization, to be faced with supporting our farmers and then also speaking out against issues that disproportionately affect them and their reputation. So it's certainly something for us as a union to consider our mandate as we move forward with this. Because
Alan Thompson, our mayor, is a farmer, and he's been painted unfairly having sold his land and been, basically corrupt to the developers, because he sold his land way over there in the north part, just north of Brampton. So they're farmers, and that the model is, you sell your land when pressure comes, you move north. That's the model, that is the agricultural model, right or wrong. So that's all I want to say.
Thank you, Debbie. Susan, did you have anything to add vis-a-vis leverage points?
Well, yeah, we have an unsustainable model, but there are leverage points. So and I was saying the 2051 review of official plans is coming up in the next year. Every regional government is going to be looking at their official plan review, making those allocations of where that growth goes. So putting in letters to the editor, making those deputations at council meeting, like Deb said, talking to your mayors, really important. That's an excellent leverage point. Provincial elections are coming up too. There's an excellent leverage point. I like the legal challenge idea, and I know Environmental Defense and other organizations have been working with Canadian Environmental Law Association and Eco-Justice. So I would encourage Josephine and her group to get in touch with those organizations and see if there can be a broader coalition can look at the health impacts and the food security impacts of the highway.
Cool. Wow, there's some really great stuff going on in the chat, and I'm thinking that in order to like capitalize most on this discussion, either I commit to, or maybe one of our board members commits to like transcribing the chat into a bit of a minutes, so that folks can, if they don't want to watch the whole presentation afterwards, can just reference a document that has these things mentioned in it. So, okay, I think that is going to be it for our discussion questions, so we can get to some of the audience Q&A. So I'm going to take a big breath, take a moment. Shannon had a question for you, Susan, about if you could speak to the recent revealing of Reina Douris and her kind of, she's connecting some dots. So if anyone, in case anyone doesn't know, Reina Douris is a broadcaster on the CBC, and she's connected some dots between the 413 highway and the developers. So I'm just going to scroll back up to here and see what she wrote specifically. Oh.
So just while you're waiting.
Oh,
Susan,
here we go. Oh,
okay.
Speak of the connections between developers such as Cordalucci and the Ford government. If you know anything you could shed some light on, and any other advice beside direct letters to our elected officials, from someone who's lost a little faith in that mechanism of intervention. So this also might touch on a little bit, Deb, with that Pointer article that was written in such dripping bias. I couldn't believe my eyeballs that, like, okay, clearly there's an agenda that author had, and who stands to gain from the needle moving in public, in the public mindset about these things. But yeah, it's a bit of a snake pit. Yeah. And I don't want to spend too much of our goodwill and time on it, but I think that, Susan, could you speak to that at all?
Not too much. I mean, I haven't looked at the developer connections, and that's something that I think Susan Walmer is looking at, like Deb mentioned. That's not really my area of expertise, how these connections happen, but I do know that you need to follow the line, who benefits from these development decisions, and it's very clear who benefits. So I think it's...
Deb, did you have a, oh, sorry.
Yeah, so Caledon's planning took a wrong turn at Albuquerque when Solmar and Benny Morato came in with his plan to develop 20,000 acres south of Bolton. And there it was, that's when our mayor was, her husband was assaulted. She was charged with accepting donations, and it was all bogus, and it was all curated, and it was all designed. And I'm not going to put myself in a position to, in fact, be sued for slander. All I will say is that, if you ask me, that's when that major disruption took place, and that is really, a lot of that is what is informing the discourse today. Look to who started the Pointer, look to what his different articles were talking about, look to that. That's all I'm going to say, because yeah, it's a very, very, it's a battle that has gone on. And Marilyn Morrison who was our mayor, she was right in the thick of it, and her life was completely impacted by that particular force from Vaughan, coming in from Vaughan over to Caledon, who wanted his way.
Yeah, it's certainly is distressing. I mean, like, we know that these kind of forces are at play, especially when there's huge, vast sums of money to be made. And yeah, it's just, it doesn't just exist, you know, in entertainment. It's at play right here. So maybe it's a way we can get people to take an interest and get involved. It's a bit sordid, and I think that sometimes people are drawn to that. Anyway, I don't focus too long on that. But and does anyone else have a question from the chat that they would like to ask?
Hey, Sarah, are you there?
Yes.
So I wrote a few questions down, or one of the questions from Caitlin. Oh, you still there?
We can hear you.
Sorry. How do you think people from Caledon should get involved in organizing against the 413? has Equal Just Network developed a relationship with the Indigenous nations to see if there's already an ongoing organization for this? That came from Caitlin. So I don't know if anybody can answer that.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Susan.
yeah. So there's a website, stopthe413.ca. Environmental Defense has got a petition. They've got a website. They've got all kinds of resources. They've been working on this since 2014. So they have a good network of people that are working on it. I would encourage you to get involved with them. Broadening the alliance to stop this highway is an excellent way. We need cross-sectoral organizations joining together, cooperating, transit groups, urbanists, like everyone can find a reason to get behind stopping this highway. It's $6 billion of provincial funding that needs to go to people.
Was the are any of you well versed in the history of the 407 and how this may be similar or dissimilar in terms of its trajectory? Is that pertinent to this, Deb?
All I know is that the 407 was never considered as a way to alleviate some of the, to meet the objectives of the EA. It was not even part of the environmental assessment. It was considered because it's a toll road, it's private, and the potentiality of it, I mean, that there's where the growth should, that's where the economic corridor should be put in. So I
that
think
road was built with public funds, right?
Yeah, and then it was, I think it was I think it was a private partnership, a private-public partnership from the beginning.
Yeah.
And then what happened is, I believe under the Liberal government, they then sold it, got sold to the, I think, a Brazilian corporation.
Conservative government.
I think it was, okay, yeah.
I say what's similar to this is the Parkway Belt West. So it was preserved back when the Niagara Escarpment plan was being created as a transportation corridor. And my conversations with David Crombie over the years, he has compared this to the Parkway Belt West because it wasn't just a highway corridor, it was called a transportation corridor, and it was for energy and all kinds of urban infrastructure that was going to support the growth of Toronto a little bit higher north. So it's moving that growth corridor higher and higher, like Deb was saying, and we are missing the point of supporting denser urban growth and maximizing our infrastructure. We just can't afford to keep doing this. It is totally unsustainable. Anyway.
So I've got a question here from the chat. Deb, did you want to add something to that?
No, that's okay.
Okay.
It's perfect.
So this is a question from Oleg. Could it be that developers will use current and following fake lockdown? I don't know if I'm going to talk about the lockdown per se, but he's asking about the speed to which the progress on the 413 is going to be made. Josephine, you have a point on this?
Yeah, I'd like to talk about that. I mean, I think actually, ironically, in a way, the lockdown almost facilitates people connecting. It keeps, I've been a part of forums like this which would have been impossible in the past. So I think we can flip that program. I think absolutely yes. There's a lot of nasty, nefarious things going on in the background while we're all focused on the pandemic and all the chaos and everything else. Yes. At the same time, that same chaos can be our opportunity. And as Lily pointed out, we are thinking about having another emergency food forum, and I would love to make this a central issue in that discussion. And we would re-invite some of the Indigenous leaders that we had at the first food forum and do some outreach to get more folks involved so that we can all have a collaborative discussion. I think that would be one way to move this forward so that we can strategize towards the elections, so that we can perhaps add some nuance or strength to legal challenges, etc. So that would be, to me, an option for moving forward. And again, the fact of the lockdown would probably allow us to have a pretty engaged, meaty forum. I think we're all getting better and better at this. And our first forum was pretty impressive. We had somebody from, we had numerous people from far northern Ontario that we would never have seen otherwise. So, let's take their plan and flip it and use it against them by taking advantage of our connectivity and taking advantage of all of these online and digital tools and forums that we're able to exercise. It actually gives us a great deal of strength. So I think I wouldn't look at it as, yeah, maybe they're doing it, but we can do it too. In fact, we can probably do it better and faster than they can, because what they're doing makes absolutely no sense. And I actually really wanted to say one thing about this. Because I've been involved internationally for a long time, I keep my eye on the ball outside of North America. And there's a little known fact that there was a climate adaptation summit last week where world leaders and leaders of all kinds of global institutions all got together, and with youth and all sorts of other folks. Huge focus on agroecology, on reforming farming as a climate adaptation strategy. Massive summit. And there wasn't one squeak in the news in here that I heard of about it. But that's what's happening. We saw mayors, we saw country leaders from Africa, from Asia, from Central America, all over the place, all talking about what has to be done, what has to happen. And interestingly, I think the fact that the United States is coming back into the fold on this struggle and is trying to change course and do a U-turn, but hopefully not back to where they were, but further ahead, is actually going to have an effect and an impact on our national politics here. Because one of the problems we have here in Canada is that the rest of the world and many Canadians assume that, you know, we're just such a lovely, wonderful country that we don't have any problems, we don't need any help. And like, as we can see, we're actually in a dire situation. So, you know, for us to be aware that the rest of the world is way ahead of us, and for people to understand that there are really solid examples of other governments, whether they're municipal or whatever, doing really solid work on these things, is very, very important for us to be aware of and to bring into the debate and to bring into public awareness. Is that these dinosaurs that are holding on to our land and just trying to endlessly make money at our disadvantage, they're completely out of line with what's going on in the rest of the world, and they can be stopped. And we need to look for examples of how this has been stopped in other places.
That's great. Thank you, Josephine. That's really kind of hopeful. And to keep an eye on the scale issue for sure, that there's multiple ways to kind of interject. Thank you. Deb, did you have a point?
All I wanted to say was that in, not to do with the pandemic, but just to reiterate that in, I think, early 2020 or late 2019, Caledon did declare state of climate emergency. And I think what we have to do is just connect the dots for them about the role that the 413 plays and sprawl plays with the climate change. So there's a huge disconnect that just leaves a gaping opportunity for us to jump into and to make that point to them, and to really to start talking back, getting back and talking to our councillors as they are our neighbors. We have to treat them as our neighbors. So
yeah, there's some fundamental kind of reassessments of our relationships to one another that are key to this. Constantly moving between like the micro scale of relationships between people and relationships of nations, and like human, like it's dizzying sometimes, but I think it's really important to be effective to keep that in view constantly. And having the three of you to speak to those different scales as you have so well today, I think has been a great kind of reminder for that. So thank you. All right, we had a question about the white belt, but then it kind of got answered in the chat. So
Sarah, can I say something?
Yeah, sure, Lily, go ahead.
I just want to build on Josephine's remarks regarding the Urban-Rural Food Forum, and also on what you had said earlier about finding the areas of high impact that we can bear upon for with regards to change. And I think that both. You're correct, Sarah, but what I've often observed is that, you know, we focus on the ROI, the return on investment with regards to where we can make the most impact most urgently, but then we forget that there's a whole ecosystem, you know, that we need to change in our human world. And what seems to be lacking in a lot of movements and campaigns and so forth is a broader coordination and for want of a better term, division of labor. You know, yes, there are areas of greater impact that that we need to focus our strength on, but then there are other areas that, you know, take a lot longer for results to manifest, but they are fundamental if we want long-lasting permanent change. And I think where I'm going with this is that I see the food forum as a venue where where all the disparate actors in the food sector can come together so that we can, you know, take a step back, look at the general picture and coordinate our different campaigns so that we can build on each other's strengths, so that our campaigns can strengthen, you know, other campaigns. So when we focus on areas of high impact, we're not drawing resources away from other areas that are needed down the road. You know, we need to not be an open hand, we need to be a closed fist, you know, and to do that, we need to come together on a regular basis and build those relationships and identify, you know, those areas where we need to focus, but also where we need to build.
Cool.
Just
Thank
to
you.
support that, back when we were fighting the trade agreements and we were trying to prevent NAFTA from taking over the entire hemisphere, we had the Hemispheric Social Alliance, and we used to gather and we used to take a look at what everybody was doing and then put everything on a timeline and figure out what went with what. And, you know, that culminated in some pretty crazy things like that horrible summit in Quebec. But we won. We blocked the FTAA. That's a little known fact. And it's something important for us to remember, how we have achieved victories of this nature in the past, particularly for young people who have no idea that these things went on. Because there's a lot of young people who I think would jump into this, you know, Fridays for Futures, a whole bunch of climate action type movements could be drawn into this. And I think if we very simply characterize what the issue is, I mean, stop Highway 413, you know, is not too hard to say. It's pretty simple concept, you know, and then people can approach it from different angles. But that kind of coalition work, you know, used to be very, very effective. And again, go back to the point that with the connectivity we now have, it's actually becoming a lot easier to do that than it used to be back then. But we did it. We did it when there was no real, you know, use of internet other than emails. So it's quite possible.
And that's amazing that that all happened. Such a different landscape. I think you've touched on something that's really key, which is like a narrative of success and also of a storytelling element where people can see perhaps where they have no frame of reference for these movements that have been successful in the past, to hear stories of real people, but also like, I don't know, I think about media applications like movies where you can get lost in a character and see yourself in them and then kind of be empowered that way. There's so much room, as you said earlier, much earlier, Josephine, for the arts to intersect with this kind of thing because it acts upon different elements of our humanity that throw us into action. But also this touches on something that Deb and I had a conversation about a few days ago, which was a mentorship program for people who want to get involved, to speak to people who have been doing this work successfully and unsuccessfully, to like midwife them into a little bit of like direct action success. And so they can stand on your shoulders in a more concerted way, so to speak. So this has kind of renewed my interest in doing that.
I like that.
Is that something the three of you might be interested in being involved in, or could contribute to a network of mentors? I'm sure there's a lot of mentees in this group as well, because farming is attracting young people, I think, at a like in a watershed way. Like it's starting to snowball because they're seeing it as a solution to so many ills. You know, it's this kind of anyway.
But
yeah,
there's mentor. Can I just say?
Sure, go ahead.
Mentor, mentee. You'll always be switching hats because I can bring a perspective of the context, but I get reinvigorated by listening to people who don't have the context, who have just this incredible blank canvas. So it's really very powerful, I think, when you bring kind of that rational to the idealistic, and then you can really build something really powerful. So I would say we all wear the mentor-mentee hat interchangeably.
Cool. I think, yeah, for sure, that's an element of language that maybe we would have to land on something that encapsulates it a bit more. You know, for everything we do, we use language to determine it. So it's really important to be intentional about the words we're using. Thank you for that point.
I'd like to mention an example of Conscious Minds Co-op, which is a youth-led co-op for climate resilience. And they look at it as intergenerational knowledge exchange. And they utilize, you know, a number of different kinds of knowledge and look at it as an exchange. But they tend to design and lead the processes of knowledge exchange, which is really refreshing. And I think it's important too, because then it, you know, it makes a better balance between the elders and the youth as we grow together. Because, you know, some of us lived much of our lives in a different kind of education process. And these young folks have created whole new ways of learning and participating in learning together. It's a form of praxis where we learn by doing and we do by learning. So yeah, there's a number of things already that we could connect in with that could help with exactly what you're saying, Sarah, that already exists. I love to try, that's what I want EcoJust Food Network to help do, is to connect all these resources and people so that, you know, we don't have to invent it. We can just utilize it, expand on it, build on it. You know what I mean? So yeah.
Yeah, totally. Because the other element is time. Like, we don't have a lot of time here to create, to engage in meaningful action. So that is like put on the afterburners. Wow. Okay. It's 3:30. Does anybody else have questions for our panelists in the chat? Otherwise, I'm going to start to wrap stuff up. So.
Can I just say something?
Oh, sure. Go ahead.
I just want to say that Debbe Crandall has a lot of success that she can tell us about. I mean, the Oak Moraine was created through a citizen-led movement that Debbe was stewarded. So there are all kinds of great opportunities here, and well, opportunities to work together and collaborate. I've been involved in some small ones in my own community, you know, turning a golf course into a forested area, stopping the big pipe from coming up here into Nobleton. But we can all make change happen. And I think there's a lot of experience here that we can share and make change going forward. I just loved working at Environmental Defense, exactly what Deb said. I'm working with young people, they're energetic, they can share all kinds of knowledge from their own experience, and I can share my knowledge from my experience. So that kind of collaboration and working together is just, I think it's really a fabulous way forward.
And just Sarah, just as I was talking to you earlier, David Crombie, who is still in the game very strongly, he, with Jane Jacobs and this whole Toronto group of people, Bill Kilbourne, they stopped the Spadina Expressway. They stopped, and which fundamentally changed the way that Toronto is. I think we grab him now. I was going to invite him to this, but I just hadn't done my PowerPoint. But I would love to have a session with him just to say, David, what's your experience here? Like, and because he taps into the whole zeitgeist, and he's still highly relevant. Yeah. He's right on
and he has
target.
People will know his name, right? Clout.
He's just the most humble, wonderful man I've ever met. I love him.
Wow, cool. Yeah, so Josephine said we could record podcasts to share the stories. That's a great media to disseminate this information. I am a podcaster. I'm not a podcaster. I've consumed them for nigh on 14 years, since 2007. And it's been a fundamental element to how I absorb information and have learned about a myriad of issues. So it's really cool. So thanks for that suggestion. And yeah, cooperatives, it seems like, and this is perhaps something that we could take to the local food and farms co-op, perhaps. But there's a lot of players that could contribute, I think, to this to this coalition for sure. Hey, Deb, you want to start a new coalition?
Catherine
Or is there already
is,
one started? Oh, sorry, go ahead, Joe.
I see Catherine putting her hand up.
Oh, yep, Catherine Soplet. Would you please go ahead?
Hi, thank you so much. Catherine Soplet, located in Mississauga, and I've been joining with ACER, the Association for Canadian Educational Resources, in tree planting for climate change research. We were able to accomplish 5 installations in Knightsbridge in November and October, having adapted the planning protocol with the Toronto Region Conservation Authority. I just wanted to say, we put in an application to Environment Canada to do this grassroots mobilizing in, with communities that are very high needs. And we're very fortunate to get a letter of support with reference to Crombie. The Waterfront Regeneration Trust gave us a letter of support for the proposal to Canadian Heritage. And we are ambitiously trying to hire 22 Canada Summer Job students to go out in the field and do some of the data and touching of the community. So I just want you to know that's something that may play out in over the next 6 months. And if we can find a model that works and works fast, we'll certainly be touching young people, because the Canada Summer Jobs mission is to take post-secondary students and match them with secondary students so they can get their volunteer hours and pass.
Mm. Okay, cool. If you'd like to share in the chat, just so for posterity, any kind of links to your project or anything like that, that'd be great. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. And thank you for the opportunity to speak.
You're welcome. And you did join late. So if you want, this was recorded from the get-go at 2. So it's something that if you feel like going back and watching it, that'd be great.
Great, thank you. I will. I wanted to be here.
Oh, no worries. It's Sunday after all. I mean, thank you all for being here on a Sunday afternoon. So yeah, we're getting a lot of like the co-op revolution is possible in the chat, which is great. Coming from Josephine. Court challenges. There's a court challenges program. Interesting. So lots of collective efforts, but
Sarah, will all these chats, all of this stuff be recorded?
Yeah.
Because I think once this ends, that disappears. So I don't know if you've captured
really?
that, because yeah.
Ooh,
It
I
can-
So
haven't,
you-
but I will make
I've
Somebody
saved it.
has to.
Somebody
I've
has
saved
to.
it and I can
Oh,
share.
Well, thank
later.
God.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Brian.
folks want it, yeah.
Once you record the video, it records the chat as well.
Oh, sweet. Well, okay. I think that I'm going to wrap it up so that everybody can enjoy the rest of this really sunny day. I don't know about where you all are, but it is. I'm almost
had
getting a
one-
sunburn here. Oh, yeah. Go
I
for
had
it,
one
Joe.
question.
Yeah.
Are people interested in the idea of us holding another emergency food forum where we can drill down on these ideas and solutions and have a couple of rounds of real, planning and brainstorming? Is that something people would be interested in engaging in or supporting sometime, say near end of March, early April? Is that something that would interest folks?
Yes, I think so. I think based on the interest today in the chat, I'll just speak for the thing, but I'd say we at Mount Wolf or Narias will partner with you to support that, but also the NFU probably will as well. It's a bit of a tough time because the farming season is just getting into swing there, but I think that we have perhaps associate members or people in our network that could help us support us in doing that simultaneously. So that's a yes from me. Deb, I'm speaking on behalf of you as well. She's nodding. This is the benefit of being related. I can.
And also, but also there's a whole environmental community that is already really engaged. The Ontario Greenbelt Alliance. I don't know if Deb Gordon is on here, but I know that she sent this. That is the Greenbelt is about food. It's about agriculture. So, and the Greenbelt is threatened by this highway. So there's that whole other stuff that I know would want to plug into this as well.
Yeah, nice.
Cool. Well, I think definitely there's going to be some follow-up conversations with you, Josephine, as well. Okay, thank you guys. Wow, what we heard, so many different things from all different areas, but I just want to highlight again how like proud I am of the way we tackled this issue from all scales. That's really, I think that's really key. So I'd like to thank you guys, our panelists, for taking time out of your busy lives, not just for today, but for all the prep that you did in advance of today's session, especially on a Sunday. And we're really grateful for your generosity in sharing your knowledge. And it sounds like that this is just the beginning of that. So, and thank you everyone on the NFU board for your hard work that went into creating this space that we could all be here today and share these ideas in a really kind of radical way. I think that Josephine's right. We have to look at this pandemic, what opportunities it's created for us to connect in a way we never could have before, identify those strengths and really kind of capitalize on them. It's exciting. And importantly, thank you to all who attended today. It's your engagement and your interest in these issues, the willingness to learn, and that's the key. That's why I think we're all doing this, because people out there care and they want to learn. So I hope that what you've absorbed here today feeds a continuing interest in what's going on with this issue, not just the 413, but what the Eco-Just Food Network is trying to do. And the micro win, it's not even that micro, would be stopping this highway. The macro win would be beginning to overturn this whole broken system, because that Band-Aid's going to get ripped off sooner or later, right? And it's either going to be really messy or a little less messy. So yeah, and you'll be able to find the recording of today's session where, Brian? Are we going to post it on, does the NFU have a YouTube channel, or will we put it on our website?
The NFU and the NFU Ontario have YouTube channels, so we will also distribute a link, hopefully not before too long, and we'll send that out to everybody who registered.
Okay, cool. Thank you everybody so much. Goodbye.